I was born in Boundary Road, Dingley, in a little farmhouse which belonged to Viv Parry. And my dad was a gardener and also a ploughman. This was before tractors. Yes, so he had the chance of buying a small property in Howard Road off Mr. Gerald Gartside, who was one of the landowners around here at that stage. And so I had one elder sister, and my sister was 2 years older than me. And when I was 3, we shifted from Boundary Road to a small property of 9.5 acres in Howard Road. And my father we changed houses with a family called Matthews, which seems to be so many children. I don't know how many they had. There seemed to be little ones running around everywhere. My dad had a wagon which he used to take into the Victorian market with produce that he'd grown. And so he shifted the 2 houses as we exchange. He'd take a load of one over to Howard Road and bring a load of Mrs. Matthews back to Boundary Road. And that's the way we shifted. Now, I can remember that, and I had not very long turned 3. That was the very first memory that I can remember. But Howard Road, none of the roads around here were formed. They were at that stage. Howard Road was just a dirt track, which occasionally the residents got together and put a load of gravel on to fill in the holes. Where Village Drive comes out to Howard Road now, it used to be blackwood wattle trees, and they grew in an arch across the road, and underneath were wild violets, which we used to love when we were children. This was all bush. The only part that wasn't bush was already had been developed. Now, there were, between Centre Dandenong Road and Lower Dandenong Road, there were just 7 houses. You can imagine how many there are now. And so everybody knew everybody else. And as I say, I had one elder sister. We used to go to school, or she did. We walked across through the market gardens to go to the school, which was on the corner of Marcus Road and Centre Dandenong Road. So off I went to school with my sister. And of course I was having a wonderful time. I was 4, just turned 4. I was having a wonderful time. They had a maypole at the school then. And of course the bigger girls thought it was fun, this little girl going around on the maypole. That's where I was when my mother finally found me and the dog. She followed the little tracks up through the paddocks. And I don't remember her actually saying it, but I remember being told to my sister, you could have at least taken her dirty pinny off, as we had pinafores to keep our frocks. But anyway, I loved school so much. I put on such a turn. I didn't want to go home. And so consequently, the headmaster talked to Mother and said, well, could you let her come 2 half days a week until Christmas? Because then we would have the number of children that we could keep the second teacher. The way it is at the moment, because we haven't got enough children in the school, it looks like we're going to lose her, and I'll have to manage the 8th grades all on their own. So Mum decided, yes, I could start school at 4 1/2, a little bit, just over 4. I loved school. I just absolutely adored it. I don't know that I was terribly good at a lot of things, but I loved maths and I loved English, so they were my strong points. Yeah, there wasn't much in the way of entertainment. There was if your parents could afford it, when the bus came along, for Saturday you could go hop on the bus and go down to Mentone and Picture Theatre or up to Dandenong. But I didn't go to the pictures at all until I was 17, and then I went to Dandenong on my bike. We rode our bikes. We rode our bikes everywhere. On the corner of Warrigal Road was a little general store called Millgate's. It was always known as Millgate Corner. And Mrs. Millgate used to make the most fabulous ice blocks. So on a really hot day, Mum used to say, would you like to go and get some ice blocks? Oh, yes. So she'd get a billy and she'd pack it with wet newspaper and leave a hole in the middle, of course, for the ice blocks. Then she'd get a piece of flannel, which she had already prepared, and she'd wet it and wind it all around the billy tied with a tape, and then off we'd go. And depending on which way the wind was blowing, we always timed it so that we had a tailwind coming home. We could either go down to Millgate's Corner or Griggs's up there. And Mrs. Grigg and Mrs. Millgate's used to wrap the ice blocks, and so then we'd hop on our bikes and pedal home as quickly as we could to get these ice blocks before they'd started to melt. They were beautiful. You know, imagine fruit salad frozen in a park. It was lovely.